Hello, I am Jamey from Stonemaier Games as usual, and today I'm joined by a special guest to discuss asymmetric games. We'll talk about that topic in a second, but for now, you want to introduce yourself and let people know why you thought of this topic and your connection to Stonemaier Games?
So I'm DG Walker. I picked asymmetric games because I think when I was first getting into the hobby, like the real hobby, the modern board game sort of thing, other than Monopoly and Life and all that stuff, I was shocked when there was asymmetry, when I was able to sort of see like that these player conditions and player powers were different between there. So modern board games kind of using that ability there, and I really got into the idea of asymmetry, and the connection I have to Stonemaier games is because Stonemaier games, actually Wingspan and Tapestry were one of the first like modern board games that I played, because I'm pretty new to the hobby. I think actually from the pandemic, that's when I really got into it. So I've just been really connected to Stonemaier games ever since. So
Awesome. Well, I love that you brought up this topic. I do have some older videos about asymmetric games, but it's a topic that I love to think about. A lot of the games that we make are asymmetric, so I'm really excited to dig in today. I did want to preface the chat, at least from my perspective, that I tried to focus on games where each player starts with kind of a core, unique asymmetric element that persists and shapes their strategy throughout the entire game, potentially leading to asymmetry or leading to replayability along through that asymmetry. Opposed to one of the most recent video I did on this topic was about asymmetric pairs. And so I generally, with Scythe, you pair a faction mat with a mech mat, or a player mat with a mech mat. And I'm sorry, I'm confusing expeditions and Scythe. You're comparing a faction mat with your player mat. So that is, I think, a great form of asymmetry. I've avoided that type for this particular list, but it's totally fine if those show up on your list. I'm curious to see if they do. I also stayed away from games like you mentioned Wingspan. As you play, becomes a very asymmetric game in every session, but it doesn't start out that way. So I stayed away from that as well. And for anyone who wants to look at this on BoardGameGeek, I found that searching under variable player powers was one of the ways that BoardGameGeek lists this. So before we jump into our list, our honorable mentions in particular, I wanted to mention really quick the Stonemaier games that feature asymmetry. It's possible they'll show up on your list. I excluded them from my list, but Euphoria has asymmetry, Charterstone, Pendulum, Tapestry has a lot of asymmetry, Scythe, Red Rising has some minor asymmetry, Expeditions, and our newest game, actually, Apiary, has the paired asymmetry system where you're pairing a hive mat, one of 5 hive mats with one of 20 faction tiles. Let's jump in and start with you. What are your honorable mentions for this category?
So my honorable mentions, I think I have like 3 of them. But I have they're honorable mentions for a couple of different reasons. And I would say that they're not the reason is not basically the quality of it. It's various reasons. So like the first one for my honorable mentions is Root. This is a game that I know that I would love if I played it more. I think the asymmetry is kind of what actually keeps me from playing it a lot, because everybody has a different faction, a different way of sort of getting points, and so what ends up happening is I end up playing with like the Eerie or the cats, and then I kind of forget like everything else, and so I just have to play those factions, and getting into other ones is tough. So it doesn't get to the table very often, mainly actually because of the asymmetry, but I really do enjoy what I've played of it.
That's a good challenge when we're talking about asymmetric games, that if you go really deep into the asymmetry, as Root does so well, you can go deep into a single faction and learn it really well, but then having to relearn that faction if you haven't played it in a while, or understand what the other factions are doing, it's a lot of information. It's like you're learning 5 different games in one. So it's really cool when a game does it. It's impressive, but it isn't inherently better, I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
sorry to
I
interrupt.
think
Yeah,
finding the balance is kind of the key. Like figuring out a way to do that where it is unique every time you play it, depending on what you're playing with, without sort of having that barrier of entry.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. One of my other honorable mentions is Ark Nova.
yeah, yeah.
And so the reason for this one being an honorable mention and not one of my top five, because it would definitely be a top five, is because I feel like the asymmetry is like incredibly light in that game. Because what I was thinking of when I was thinking of the asymmetry was the starting, like the map, right? The map that you have that you're building the zoo on. And so like those definitely kind of push you in one way or the other. But other than that, it's like, yeah, you got your cards and you're going to go in different directions. But that was kind of like what you were saying in the beginning of like, you get a direction kind of as the game goes, and
Yeah.
everybody's kind of doing something different there.
Totally. I love Ark Nova too, but I found with Ark Nova, I often end up teaching it, and I am more than happy to play with the starter mat almost every
Yeah.
time. Like I get that people like the various mats if it
Yeah.
pushes them in a different direction, but I am happy to play Ark Nova with that original mat because the game still pushes me in so many unique directions every time I play while the cards are revealed. Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, every game kind of feels very unique because
Yeah.
whatever cards you get kind of push you in that direction. So I do enjoy that a lot because of that.
And your third one?
Yeah, my third one is definitely a stretch, and it's only because I really wanted it on a list. I wanted to mention it, but it's Everdell, but with the caveat of it's with the Spirecrest expansion, because
Okay.
Everdell I feel like is not asymmetric otherwise, but like when you do Spirecrest, you have that sort of path that you're going down after every kind of season, and you're often gaining like either special workers that you can then place and do special things with it. You're gaining unique like placement, like worker placement spots with Spirecrest as well. So like that one, again, one of my favorite games is Everdell, but the asymmetry doesn't come unless you have Spirecrest, I feel like. And then, but I love it a lot. So that's why I've done that.
I'm glad you mentioned that one too in the honorable mentions because I also did not include games where the asymmetry doesn't come into play until you have an expansion. I'm looking at core games where the asymmetry is built into the core game itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great honorable mentions there. I have a slightly longer list. So I won't go as deep into them, but Star Wars Rebellion, very asymmetric two-player epic game, Clans of Caledonia, and the Voyages of Marco Polo, both of which are Euro games with very interesting asymmetric elements that I think add a lot to the replayability. Oathsworn has a decent amount of replayability or asymmetry built into each character. Forbidden Desert, I threw this on because, the asymmetry doesn't do a lot in this game, but it does, because it's a lighter cooperative game, but it does play into my decisions and plays into that element of teamwork that emerges from Forbidden Desert. So I appreciate that. There's a trick-taking game called Tricktakers that has a lot of asymmetry in the game, but it's the type of asymmetry that evolves over the course of the game. So, but that's actually an asset, I believe, in the game, that you get to try a bunch of different roles while you're playing instead of just one character or one faction for the entire game. Terra Mystica might be a surprise I left that one off the list, but one of the things that I thought about, the question that I asked for many of these was, would I enjoy this game just as much without the asymmetry? You mentioned Ark Nova. That applies to Ark Nova for me.
Yeah.
Terra Mystica, honestly, I love the core game. I would probably play the same faction over and over again if that was the only faction I could play. So
yeah.
Put in honorable mentions. Dune Imperium, one with great asymmetry, but again, one that I would gladly play even if it didn't have the asymmetry. Role Player Adventures. I love Role Player Adventures, but I actually don't, and it's been a while since I played it, but I didn't recall the asymmetry playing all that much into the decision points and the cooperation in the game. Commander Magic, I'm very new to that style of play Magic the Gathering, but I think it has a lot of asymmetry. Captain Sonar is an asymmetric team-based game where each player has a very different mini game that they're running compared to the other players. And last, Sentinels in the Multiverse, where you have your own unique deck of character cards that you're playing in a cooperative game. That will that kind of theme will show up throughout my list of having your own unique deck of cards as you're playing. Any of those that stand out to you that maybe aren't on your top five, but that you want to play or have played and enjoy?
Well, what stood out to me, I guess, was what you mentioned. I'm very shocked Terra Mystica was not in your top five because it really stood out to me, and you've talked about it a lot. But yeah, Captain Sonar, that's actually a great pick, because that is just outright fun.
Yeah.
Just a really fun game when you have the player count for it. And yeah, that does kind of, it gives that. I love that. That's a great pick.
Awesome. Well, let's jump in and see what you put on your list at number 5.
Yep. So number 5 is Terra Mystica.
Oh, it is Terra Mystica. Okay.
Yeah, all right. When you mentioned that, so this one again, I have reasons for everything, but like this one's probably lower on the list because I don't know if I can dock it just because I'm so bad at this game. I'm just really bad at it. So I don't know if I'm really bad or my wife is just that good at it, but like our gap of scores is just off the charts there. But yeah, so Terra Mystica, you have all these different factions, and every faction feels just so unique. But what I think it does that kind of hurts Root is that like the basic thing that you're doing kind of every time, like you're getting your buildings off, you're upgrading those buildings, you're terraforming the land, doing all that stuff is kind of the same across, but like how you do those things changes depending on your faction. So the asymmetry really, I think, allows you to have a completely unique game kind of every time. But I'm able to get back into Terra Mystica faster than Root because I get the basic concept of it. And yeah, so it's a great game. I'm just really bad at it, so that's kind of what it's at.
Do you have a favorite faction that if you could choose any of them that you would gravitate towards more than the others?
Okay, so I'm pretty sure, is it the what is it, the cultists?
Yeah.
I think it was the cultists. Yeah, so the cultists I like a lot because the cult track is something I often forget about. Like I'm focusing a lot on the map, but then the cultists kind of allow me to push up without having to really like do a ton there. So the cultists I do like. I like them a lot.
I like the Chaos Magicians, one of the red factions that only starts with one settlement on the board, but they're extra good at interacting with the power tiles, the oval tiles.
Yeah.
And there's another similar faction, one of the expansions that I think starts out with a power tile. I think part of it is I like power tiles, but I also like asymmetry, where part of the asymmetry feels like a disadvantage, and that to me is an interesting puzzle to solve. Like, oh, I only get to start with one settlement. There must be something balancing this out. What can I do to take advantage of that balance? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is true. I like when it feels that way too. That is cool.
Awesome. Terra Mystica, a great pick, a game that I love, very close to making my list, but I would play it even without the heavy asymmetry. My number 5 is one of these games where every player has a unique deck of cards, and that is Villainous. So I have the Marvel Villainous here. There's lots of different versions of Villainous. I think that there's the Disney one. Disney is probably the original one. Then Marvel came after that. But I'm amazed that this game works so well with the sheer amount of asymmetry in the game. You can see each player has their own little Marvel villain in this game, where they have their own unique deck of cards that they're playing, and also there's a whole other deck of cards that interacts with the other players at the table, that gives them slight disadvantages that are character specific and feel built into the theme really, really well. It's just it's a game where they could have not gone all in on the asymmetry, but they really did, and they designed every deck of cards to feel like they're part of what that specific villain is doing. So yeah, the whole Villainous brand to me is really impressive, and I thought it was worth mentioning on this list. Have you played any of the Villainous games?
Yeah, we actually have all of them.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, we have we're actually huge Disney fans as well.
Nice.
And so yeah, we've gotten a lot of them, if not all of them, a lot of them. And I agree completely, and I can't believe I blanked on it when I was making my list, but yeah, the asymmetry it's so, like you said, so impressive how it works, because every villain is doing something completely kind of unique. Their win condition is so different than another one, and the way they play is different, and it just adds so much to it. Like you really feel like you're that villain, which is really cool. So yeah, I love that pick. That's great.
And I'm glad you expanded on that too, because you're right. It isn't just that you're playing cards that feel different for your abilities, but it's also that unique goal that you have a very different win condition than the other players. And in addition to that, that you have your own unique way of getting in the way of other players' win conditions.
Yeah.
That's amazing that they pulled it off.
Yeah, it is really great. The Fate deck too. That's a
Fate
cool.
deck. Yeah,
that's a really cool part to it too as well.
so that is my villain is at my number 5. Terra Mystica, your number 5. What is your number 4 favorite asymmetric game?
Yeah, so my number 4, and I'm willing to have you debate me out of like this being an asymmetric game, but I definitely think it is. But it's a 2-player game called Watergate.
Oh yeah.
And so the way it's, the Watergate, it's what it sounds like. It's about the Watergate scandal. And I really enjoy the whole the tug of war aspect of this game. And like, so you're either the Nixon administration or the reporters. And so so basically you're those two, you're one of those two, and your deck of cards is very different than like the other deck of cards, and what you're trying to do in the game is different, but you're sharing the space because like there's a whole, I probably should have gotten it, but there's this whole bulletin board with different pictures on it, and you're either, if you're the reporters, you're trying to make a line to Nixon twice, and if you're Nixon, you're trying to block it. And so I never really played a game like that before, where you're just like you're facing off like that, and basically it can feel like wild swings are happening, where you feel like you're about to win, and then just a few rounds next, the other side is really pulling it their way. And so I've just had some really great stories and really great moments with this game, and I really enjoy it. It's very different, I think. So I like that game.
I love this pick. I'm kind of wishing I put it on my list now. I didn't even think of it for the honorable mentions, but I should have, because you're right. It's a wonderfully asymmetric 2-player game. And I think 2-player games, do I have any on my list? I have 1 2-player specific. No, I have 2 on my list. I think 2-player games can really thrive for asymmetry, because you really only have to test 2 different factions. Then you can really go deep into the asymmetry in each of those characters, factions, whatever the asymmetric element is, and make sure they're as balanced as possible. Whereas if you're doing a multiplayer game with a lot of different asymmetric factions or characters, it's a little harder to test and to analyze that data. So I love what they did with Watergate. I'm sure there's someone who will say in the comments that one is is stronger than the other, and that's okay. But to me, that's a challenge. I love that when I hear someone say that. I'm like, okay, well, let me try to beat you then with the other one.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that is great. Yeah.
Watergate at number 4. I like it. My number 4 is maybe the lightest game on my list, and that is Mysterium Park, or Mysterium. This is a game that uses asymmetry of information for the most part. You have limited information, where one player plays as a spirit, a ghost, someone who can't communicate other than through these weirdly illustrated cards that they can pass out to the other players to show them information like who didn't commit the murder and where the murder didn't happen. So they're narrowing down a list of suspects to the end of the game, where the players try to guess the suspects. But the asymmetry in this game is the kind of it's not one versus many, because you're all cooperating together, but it's one player has this asymmetry of full information. They know everything that happened. They're trying to share that information with the other players. And then all the other players are working with each other to solve the mystery, based on the information that the ghost player or the spirit player is giving them. So I wanted to highlight a game with that asymmetric information, because even though the players are doing very different things, that one player, the ghost, is doing a very different thing than the other players, but they're interacting with the same components. They're working together to try to pull it off, even with the limited communication, limited information. So thought that was worth mentioning. I like Mysterium Park because it's a little shorter, easier to set up than Mysterium, but both are fun games. Have you played either one of the Mysteriums?
Yeah, so Mysterium's one of our favorites. We really enjoy that game. It's a good one to bring to like, a party, or just a big group of people, because you're all working together like that. We do have Mysterium Park. It's on the shelf of opportunity, basically. We haven't played it yet, but yeah, we really enjoy Mysterium, so I'm sure we're gonna like Mysterium Park as well. So it's great. Yeah.
I think it's one that flew under the radar a little bit. It came out during the pandemic, maybe. And so Megan and I played it just 2 players during the pandemic for a while. And it actually worked really well during just with 2 players. So
I was curious about that because Mysterium, we find 2 players works, but it is a little bit, you're trying to figure out twice. But Mysterium
yeah,
Park kind of I guess fixes that. So
yeah, I found it works quite well with 2. Yeah,
good. All right, that's great.
awesome. So Mysterium Park and Watergate at number 4. What's your number 3 favorite asymmetric game?
Yeah. So number 3, I have Star Wars Outer Rim.
Mm,
I feel like it was one of the biggest surprises for me because I really went into it like thinking it was one of the first kind of games we had that was really based on IP,
mhm,
and I was sitting there like, is it gonna be good? I don't really trust it as much
yeah,
that way, but I was just blown away, just kind of uh, playing it because I think it's the closest I've ever been to kind of playing a role player game, like an actual something like that. Because when you get your person, when you get your scoundrel, and you're
yeah,
playing them, and they have their own kind of power, and you have your ship, and you have your reputation with certain factions, and
mhm,
everything just kind of shapes how you approach the challenge of the game.
yeah,
And it's just I found myself for for one of the first times actually trying to embody
uh-huh.
this character and do actions like this character. And so yeah, this one blew me away because I just wasn't expecting it to be this way, and I think there's just so many cool, unique aspects of it, and the asymmetry really does get you to play differently. I feel like, but it was a good one. It's very surprisingly good.
I've only played this once, but I'm glad you highlighted it, and I'm glad you highlighted this idea that asymmetry can really lead you down very different paths within the same game based on that character, based on that ship, based on your character's motivations and skills and things like that. I think sometimes it's a tricky balance because sometimes asymmetric games can feel like they are telling you you must do this thing.
Yeah,
But in Outer Rim, I didn't feel that way. I felt like it was saying, okay, you are a little better at these things, and I leaned into it in that play, but
yeah,
I could have branched off and done something differently. I didn't have to do that. I could have gained cards that gave me that made me better at other skills or improve my ship in different ways. But it is fun when you can really embody that character, and the asymmetry gives you that level of immersion.
yeah, absolutely.
At number 3, I have a game that's much more abstract than Star Wars Outer Rim, but one that I've really enjoyed over the last year, and that is Bullet. This is Bullet. There's a couple different versions of Bullet. I think this is the Star version. Oh, Bullet Heart. There it is. This is Bullet Heart. So this is a very difficult game to describe in terms of how it works because it's a fairly abstract game in terms of this idea that you have these bullets that are dropping down onto your board, and you are trying to clear them off. You don't want them on there, and when you clear off bullets, you're actually passing them to the other player. So you are adding things that they don't want to that other player, and you end up clogging up their board. And you remove them by manipulating the tokens into certain shapes and patterns, and then using your cards, your unique deck of cards, to remove them. And there's 2 levels of asymmetry for each character. You have your own character Matt, which is very asymmetric. I'll try to pull up some and flash them across the screen to show you. Uh, each character has its own ability and their own usually they have a different amount of health. So here's a character that has 3 health and their ability printed on there. Here's a character that has a bunch of health, a cat themed character, and they have their own special ability. But they also have their own unique deck of cards that really ends up feeling very different. They aren't just different patterns that they're trying to remove, but also very different ways of removing those patterns from the board. So this is one that I really enjoyed. Where I don't think I would have enjoyed this game as much if I had to play the same character every time, if that asymmetry wasn't there. But because of the asymmetry, I've come back to it multiple times, and I've wanted to try out those different characters and get to know them better. Have you heard of this one or played this one?
So I've heard of it, but I think I've heard of it only because of you, because you have mentioned it a few times.
Yeah,
But no, I have not played it. I'm intrigued by the art, like the box that you're holding up, and
yeah.
I do seem to gravitate it. It kind of has, yeah, I was gonna say Radlands Field, but it doesn't really. But yeah, that art really pops, and I do, and
Yeah.
yeah, it looks good. It sounds very interesting for sure. So yeah, it's one I want to give a try for sure.
It's another one of these games that I am so impressed that each character has its own unique deck of cards that really feels unique. I know how hard that is to do. I've tried it. I run out of ideas for doing it. So I'm impressed that any designer can pull it off.
Yeah, that
So
does
that's
seem
our
like a
number. Yeah,
challenge. Yeah.
it is. Yeah, it's a huge challenge. So that's Star Wars Outer Rim and Bullet and our number threes. What is your number two?
So yeah, my number two is Spirit Island.
Mm-hmm.
I really was taken by this game kind of from go. The first time we played it. This so like my wife doesn't really like co-op games that much, and I'm often playing with her. But there was a time where we first got it where we just kept throwing ourselves at this game trying to beat it. And I think what really drew me in was just how completely thematic it is, and how every action that you do makes like total sense within the world of Spirit Island. And it's just one of those things where like I'm trying my hand at designing board games myself, and it is one of those things I really want to try to do, is kind of make it so like every action kind of makes sense within that world. And Spirit Island does it well. So like the idea of you embodying different spirits, and those spirits have completely unique powers, and you really have to work together with who you're playing with in order for it to work at all, for you to have any chance at all of winning the game. So it's really tough, but like if you figure out a way to synergize with who you're playing with, it's great. It feels great when you win, and it feels great even when you don't at times.
Yeah.
But it's just fun. It's a fun game.
Two things I'll throw in there to add to how amazing Spirit Island is in terms of a cooperative game. I think some cooperative games try to solve that puzzle of the quarterback or the alpha player, and this with an asymmetric game especially a game that goes so deep in the asymmetry, you have to manage so much information on your own that it's really tough for you to, if you even wanted to quarterback another player, for you to have that much information in your head as well. So I think that overload of asymmetric information is an asset for avoiding quarterbacking or that alpha player. I think there's also something to be said for it's a little outside of the topic of player specific asymmetry, but in Spirit Island, you can play against different asymmetric, is it countries, nations?
Yeah, it's I forget what they call it, but it's definitely different, like foes, or I don't know what they call them, but yeah, there's different groups of people that you're going against.
So that's another a neat form of asymmetry, especially in a cooperative game where you can make each game feel a little bit different based on your nemesis in the game.
Yeah. Oh, I think it might actually be Nemesis. I don't know.
Okay. Nice. Spirit Island at number two for you. I went with another dueling game, Dice Throne. I have the Marvel Dice Throne version here. I had both for a while, but I realized that we just needed one, and we love the Marvel theme. I've done two Marvels today, Marvel Villainous and Marvel Dice Throne. This is primarily a two-player dueling game where each player has their own character and their own set of custom dice, their own deck of cards, their own player mat. So everything's asymmetric for the character that you choose. And it's at its heart, it's a Yahtzee game where you're rolling dice a few times to decide which results that you want, and then you're using the final result to activate one of your powers on your mat to try to reduce your opponent to zero health. So kind of a very simple overall system, which I think helps to have a simple foundation, and then they've layered on all this asymmetry through the different cards that you can play, through the way your dice work, oftentimes giving each player a bunch of unique tokens that they can use to apply ongoing effects to their character or to the opposing character, and the player mat itself, which has a variety of different abilities based on the different dice combinations. Megan and I played this when we first got it. We played it in tournament format where we each chose a character, played against one another, and then had another head-to-head format matchup until we got it down to like 4 characters, and then we did another round and then another round for the finale. That was a lot of fun to play that way and to experience different characters. But yeah, I love the asymmetry in this game. Really, really fun asymmetry. Have you played any of the versions of Dice Throne?
No, I haven't. I haven't. But the whole Yahtzee thing that you're kind of saying, I don't know. It sort of made me think of like King of Tokyo a little bit, where you're doing that sort of thing, and you have a similar sort of system there. I think there might be a little asymmetry in there, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, I haven't played that, but yeah, I do love Marvel, so I might have to give that a try.
Awesome. So yeah, Marvel Dice Throne, and I didn't type out yours here, but yeah. Let's get to our number ones. What are our number one picks?
All right. So this one, yeah, I was really debating what to do for number one for a reason that's going to be very obvious. But I try to talk myself out of it. But honestly, I'd be lying to myself. My number one is Tapestry. It is it just because it was one of the first games that we got after we really got into the hobby, and so it's definitely my most played game. I would say, like, between BGA and like actual tabletop, definitely my most played game. But the asymmetry in it, it really does affect the game in very interesting ways. Like, whatever civilization you get, you have those two choices at the beginning of which civilization, and you're kind of deciding what path you want to go down, which is, very often it kind of really drives where you go. And then you also have the two choices of your district, like your capital city, and that definitely plays a role because it's been a talk with the BGA players. The desert and wetlands combination, like when you get those two choices, you're like, well, I'm gonna have a hard time this game because it is tough to fit those landmarks on there. But yeah, it is. I just, for me, it's pretty infinitely replayable because of the different combinations that you can get there, different paths. I know that's not asymmetry, but the tapestry cards you get will really kind of put you in different directions as well. So to me, yeah, that's, I would be lying to myself if it wasn't number one. Although I know, yeah, it's kind of weird to come on here and say that's my number one, but it's true. It is true for that. So.
Well, I'm honored and flattered by that. I'm glad you're enjoying it. And yeah, the asymmetry was a huge part of the design, and really one of the really fun parts of the design. Like what it gave me a way to explore a lot of different game mechanisms that maybe I don't want to design a whole game around this mechanism. So I'll put it into a civilization and play around with it and see what I can do with it. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And Tapestry, I think, is somewhat infamous for. I think a lot of people hear that and they're like, "Oh, that imbalanced game," and I think that's a little unfortunate because I think I don't know. Obviously, I love Tapestry, but I think it is there are civs that are definitely stronger than others, some that are weaker than others. I think that's a fun challenge, and I think you probably don't even realize that until you've played Tapestry a lot. You can have a lot of fun with Tapestry without realizing that there are some that are stronger or weaker than others. At the same time, I agree with them. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm glad you're able to find the fun in it, despite that. We are coming out with a revised Civ pack, kind of a final revised Civ pack based on all this data and feedback that we've gotten over the years that I think will get a lot closer to balancing them. I don't know if they'll ever be perfectly balanced, but I'm happy with the changes that we're making. And we even completely revamped a few of the civilizations that people just weren't having fun with. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that pack coming out in a few months. But yeah, I'm flattered that you mentioned Tapestry. Thank you.
Yeah, I am too. I'm looking forward to those as well. But yeah, I do agree. Yeah, those civs. Yeah, it is the challenge. It really is the challenge whenever you get dealt that thing, and you got to be like, yeah, okay, I'll go with this, I guess. Pick my poison.
We also, one thing that I find difficult as a designer for my own games is adding complexity ratings to different civs or factions. And that was one thing that people called on for the revised Civ pack. So it will come with little ratings to say this is more complex, less complex, or easier to play. Not necessarily better to play, but easier to play with. I think that's helpful for people, and I'm impressed whenever designers do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you for mentioning Tapestry. My number one is not a Stonemaier game. But it is a Star Wars game. You mentioned a Star Wars game today. I've been loving the Star Wars deck building game. I mentioned it a lot on recent videos, but I think it does something unique with asymmetry that I think is worth highlighting. In that so it's a deck building game, fairly standard deck building game, and your starting deck really isn't very different at all than the other players. The asymmetry from the game comes from two different elements. One is this central deck of cards. So it's a common shared deck that you never have to sort through. You don't have to sort through it for player count or for factions or anything like that. It's always the same deck of cards that you're shuffling up. But as cards come out into the central row, based on whether I am the rebels or the Empire, I interact with those cards in different ways. So if I'm the Empire and the Darth Vader card comes out, I am trying to obtain that card, trying to use my resources to gain Darth Vader into my deck. But the other player cannot do that. The rebels cannot gain Darth Vader into their deck. Instead, their choice when that card is in the center row is to try to remove it from the center row using the military power. I can't remember the name of the game, but it's like the strength or force in the game. They're trying to remove it from that row so that I can't get to it. And that's just, I think, such a clever design decision that I had this one shared deck of cards that each player is interacting with in such a different way. I think is really, really clever. The second layer to it also are your bases. The way that you win a game is that you destroy 3 opponent bases, and that's out of 10 total bases that the Empire has that are unique to the Empire, and 10 total bases that the Rebels have that are unique to them. Whenever I destroy, so if I'm the Empire and I destroy your Rebel base, you get to decide which base you want to activate after that. It might have an ongoing ability, it might have a comes into play ability that's really powerful. They're all asymmetrically designed, so it's essentially 20 different base designs within the game, and they feel a little bit different based on the Empire or the Rebels. I've really been enjoying it. I'm just impressed by that type of asymmetry where from the start of the game, it is an asymmetric game, even though your deck itself is not asymmetric. I actually have one other thing to add to that about a different game, but did you have any thoughts about Star Wars deck building?
No, so I haven't played this game, but like that element of you can't take that, like it's in there, it's out in the open, but you can't take that if you're one of the sides in the game. It just is super intriguing to me. So yeah, I really want to play it. That seems really cool.
The thing I thought about as I was talking about it a little bit is I wanted to give a small shout out to one of my honorable mentions, Dune Imperium, because I think it does something interesting with asymmetry that I think is worth exploring. If I ever designed an asymmetric deck building game where each player's deck of cards are identical, but there's one card, the Signet Ring, that triggers the asymmetric ability printed on your player mat. I thought that was a really clever design decision because it means that each player doesn't need to worry about which cards are in their deck. All the decks are the same. It just it looks at something outside of the deck to trigger that ability.
That is cool.
I thought it was clever.
That's really neat.
Yeah. So that's my number one Star Wars deck building game, and Tapestry for you at number 1. We talked about some great games today. Yeah, this is going to be excited to play some asymmetric games. In fact, we're playing the Lost Ruins of Arnak expansion right now, and it has great asymmetry amongst the characters in that expansion too.
Yeah, that's cool. We played the Expedition Leaders expansion with that, which is really fun. I really like the hawk or the bird or whatever that is. That's a cool one.
Yeah,
that's neat.
That's one that probably would have been eligible for the list, but it is Arnak adds that asymmetry in an expansion and not in the core game, so I didn't make it eligible here.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I thought of it, but I was like,
no. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up this video? And of course, anyone watching this, you're welcome to share your thoughts about your favorite games that we mentioned. I'm sure we'll have some Root lovers out there. We're not knocking on Root. Root is an incredibly designed asymmetric game. It's just they went all in on it, which I admire. I think there's some impediments to doing that, and I'd love to hear people who love Root share your favorite faction in the comments below, and your favorite, maybe your top 3 favorite asymmetric games. Do you have anything to add before we head on out?
Asymmetry for me, like I said, is one of those things that really kind of shocked me when I was first getting into the hobby, and I thought it was just so cool and unique. And yeah, some of these games that you mentioned, I definitely want to give a try on. I really appreciate you having me on for this conversation. Because your design videos and these kind of videos really help kind of make me feel like I'm part of that community as well. So I do appreciate what you do, and thank you for having me, honestly.
Well, thank you for being a part of the community. I really, really appreciate it. This is awesome. Thank you so much for this chat about asymmetric games.